the cost. So, Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders were delayed in the US and Canada due to a raise in tariffs for Vietnam. Nintendo moved production from China to Vietnam to dodge Trump's tariffs, but now his tariffs will affect all countries, so pre-orders in the US are being delayed. Tariffs in Vietnam are 50%. So if we add that 50% to the current price of the Switch 2, it could be upwards to $675.
Oh my god.
The Verge says when the Switch 2 launches on June 5th, it will cost $450. Applying some back of the napkin math, if we treat the new tariffs as averaging out around 40%, that equates to an extra $180, leaving a possible final price of $630. Applying that same logic to games, with Mario Kart World already set to cost $79.99, and you get a final price of $110. Use the worst case rate, Cambodia's 49% tariff, and the numbers jump to $670 and $120. The actual prices should be lower than that. Tariffs are generally calculated based on a product's declared value at import, not its final retail price. We don't know the Switch 2's declared value for certain, but the Financial Times reports that shipments for Vietnam listed it at $338. If we apply the 40% to that, and then add back in the $112 difference between it and the current retail price, we get a slightly better final price of $585. That still doesn't feel like a bargain though, but it would be better. And so of course they're not going to just blatantly go, okay, 50 tariffs, we're going to add 50%. Now it's $670. No, they're not going to do that.
I sure hope not.
It's probably going to be $500 or $550, which is still a lot. But
of money.
It would be better than the alternative.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would suck if that happens. But the thing is, I don't think it will, because there's some good news out there, okay? This in general, just it's terrifying and threatens to collapse the global economy and affect more than just gaming. And it's just not easy to figure out what us average folk can do about it other than wait and listen. One thing that we should keep in mind is that this is not Nintendo's fault.
Yeah.
The keep politics out of my games crowd is attempting to shift blame to Nintendo when it's politics that's forcing this decision, not Nintendo. But not all is lost. If there's anything we can count on, it's for greedy rich people to be greedy and rich and not want to pay out the wazoo for imported products due to this monumentally, it's not momentarily, I don't know why I wrote that, monumentally stupid decision by Trump. If God is real, the 1% will lead on Trump to cut this shit out because it affects them too. But there's more good news. Let me open my other laptop to read this article. So, Nintendo Switch 2 U.S. price is unlikely to rise if Trump tariffs remain at 10%, analyst says. So, this is coming from Video Games Chronicle, written by Chris Scullion. Last week, Trump introduced a blanket 10% tariff on all imports, with countries like China, Vietnam, and Japan, which Trump calls among the worst offenders, aka racism, getting larger tariffs of 54%, 46%, and 24% respectively. Since most of Nintendo's imports in the US come from Vietnam and Cambodia, Trump's decision to apply 46% tariffs on Vietnam could potentially have an effect on the price of Nintendo hardware, most notably the upcoming Switch 2. As a result, last week Nintendo said it was delaying Switch 2 pre-orders. However, while Trump has since increased China's tariffs to up to 125%, Jesus Christ, he has decided to pause all other tariff hikes for 90 days, meaning his 10% tariffs applies to all other affected countries, including Vietnam. According to a new report at Bloomberg, Trump's decision to pause the hike means it's likely that Nintendo will keep the US Switch 2 price at $450 at least until the 46% tariff kicks in. Speaking to the publication, Bernstein analyst Robert Zhu said, if the tariff stays at 10%, Nintendo probably keeps pricing at $450 and just takes the hit on margin. At 46% Vietnam tariffs, I expect them to raise by $50 to $100, like we just said, either to $500 or to $550. The report states that Hosiden Corp, a Vietnam assembler, which is one of the three main Switch 2 assemblers, has been shipping all of its stock to US since January, as opposed to between 11 and 60% over the course of the previous 12 months, meaning They might have already stockpiled the U.S. with Switches
Ooh.
before the tariffs went into place. So at least when it first comes out, it might still be $450. So there's hope. There's hope.
Yeah.
And I want to hope that this is all going to work out. At the very least, this can't last because it affects the people who affect Trump, which are other rich people in power. So the reality is this just can't stand because of that, because it's affecting the people who unfortunately have the power and sway in this situation. Yeah. So at the very least, we can count on that. So,
Yep.
Hopefully that results in us not having to pay $550 for this console.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And then $80 for Mario Kart. Which, speaking on that, there's a chance that they're doing this because Mario Kart is one of the best-selling games of all time. And they know that people are going to just buy this game no matter what, even if it's $80. And they could get people to pay $80 for this, and that this won't become like the regular price for Nintendo games. Even a new Mario game probably won't be $80. But this one it might stay this way. But there's also the potentiality that it doesn't stay this way. That once more games start coming out, they do not get back down to 70, and that becomes the permanent price. You want to hope. So, we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully this all works out.
Yeah.
But, I forget the quote exactly, but I was watching a podcast called The Downside with a comedian named Jimako, I think Moresi, and he had Brennan Lee Mulligan, who's works for Dropout. He hosts Dimension 20, their D&D show, and he talked about, like, he's a huge activist, and he talked about hope, right? Hope and despair. He said that the time now isn't for hope or despair, because you don't want to despair, because that just sucks and you can't get anything done that way. But also for some people, hope is just waiting for someone else and hoping for someone else to come in and fix things. And it's not time for either of those things. Of course, I view hope differently. For me, hope isn't waiting for someone to come help. It's hoping that someone will come and help me help everyone else. Like I'm gonna put in the work, and I want to hope that other people also put in the work, and that all together we put in the work to make change. But I also 100% see where he's coming from, because for a lot of people, hope is just hoping someone else will take the problem away from them, and that's not gonna happen. You got to put the work in. No. We got to put the work in. We got to prevent this stuff from happening. We got to call our senators. We got to do what needs to be done. I've called the senator for the first time last week, for some stuff revolving around immigration laws, and you just got to put the work in. You got to do what you got to do. Some of it's small, and if enough people do a small thing, it stacks up.
Exactly.
So just do what you can to make the world a better place.